A gated estate in Palm Beach County. Early morning. Two Palm Beach County Sheriff's deputies on a perfectly manicured driveway. The front door opens. A woman in her mid-40s, composed, well-dressed for 6 a.m., not a hair out of place. She says, "I've been expecting someone." She had been expecting someone. Not because she had called 911, not because a neighbor had called, not because anything visible from the outside of that $4.2 million estate suggested that anything was wrong. She had been expecting someone because, on some level, she knew the thing she had done could not hold forever. Her husband, Richard Callahan, 61 years old, founder of a logistics technology company worth $37 million at the time of his death, had been found dead in their master bedroom 4 days earlier. The Palm Beach County Medical Examiner had initially classified the death as cardiac arrest. Richard had a documented heart condition. He had been under a cardiologist's care for 3 years. His death, on the surface, looked like the thing his doctors had told him to be careful about. It was not that thing. It was his wife, Diana Callahan, 44, and it was a method so deliberate, so precisely calibrated to his existing medical history, and so carefully executed over a period of 6 months that it might never have been discovered at all, except for one thing, one specific detail that the medical examiner's toxicologist flagged on the 4th day of the autopsy process. One number that was slightly, almost imperceptibly wrong. And one detective who decided that slightly wrong was worth a conversation. Today we go through all of it. Music, low, wealth-tinged, the specific quiet of Palm Beach at dawn. Richard Callahan built his money the unglamorous way. He had founded a freight logistics software company in Tampa in 1998, the kind of business that nobody outside the industry had ever heard of, that solved a specific, boring, essential problem for shipping companies, and that made its founder quietly, durably wealthy over 20 years of grinding growth. By the time he sold the company in 2019 for $31 million, Richard Callahan was 57 years old. He was not famous. He was not flashy. He was, by the account of everyone who knew him, a methodical, private man who liked deep-sea fishing, college football, and the specific satisfaction of a problem solved cleanly. He had been married to Diana for 11 years. She was his second wife. His first marriage had ended in divorce in 2007. He had 2 adult children from that marriage, a son, Patrick, and a daughter, Melissa, neither of whom had ever fully warmed to Diana. Diana Callahan had worked in luxury real estate before marrying Richard. She understood wealth aesthetically in a way Richard never had. The Palm Beach estate had been her choice. The interior designer, the social calendar, the charity board memberships, all Diana. Richard had paid for all of it and spent most of his time in the fishing room. He had converted from a 4th bedroom, reading industry journals and watching game tape. Friends of Richard's described the marriage as functional but distant. Diana's friends described Richard as difficult and withholding. Nobody described it as happy. What nobody described it as, until the investigation, was a marriage in which one party had spent 6 months engineering the death of the other. Richard Callahan's estate planning was thorough. His will, updated in 2021, divided his assets, $8 million in trust for his 2 children from his first marriage, a $2 million charitable bequest, and the remainder, approximately $27 million after taxes and bequests, to Diana as a surviving spouse. The life insurance policy had been taken out in 2020, $10 million. Diana as sole beneficiary, $37 million total, in the event of Richard's death. The policy had a contestability clause. If the insurer could establish that the cause of death was concealed or misrepresented at the time of application, the policy could be voided. But a cardiac death in a man with a documented cardiac history would not trigger a contestability review. It would trigger a check. Diana Callahan knew this. The investigation would establish that she had researched it specifically. Richard Callahan died on the morning of October 14, 2023. Diana told a responding EMS crew that she had woken at approximately 6 a.m., found Richard unresponsive beside her, and called 911 immediately. The call was logged at 6:04 a.m. The initial EMS assessment was consistent with cardiac arrest. Richard had no pulse. Resuscitation was attempted and unsuccessful. He was pronounced dead at 6:31 a.m. The attending physician, given the documented cardiac history, signed the death certificate with cardiac arrest as the preliminary cause. The Palm Beach County Medical Examiner's Office conducted a standard autopsy. Given the cardiac history, nothing about the initial external examination was unexpected. The pathologist noted the coronary artery disease documented in Richard's medical records. The heart showed changes consistent with his condition. The toxicology screen was standard. It came back largely clean. But on the fourth day, the toxicologist running the extended panel flagged something to the lead pathologist: a digoxin level. Digoxin is a cardiac medication, a drug derived from the foxglove plant, used to treat heart failure and certain arrhythmias by regulating the heart's electrical activity. Richard Callahan's cardiologist had prescribed him digoxin as part of his cardiac management. The level in Richard's post-mortem blood was elevated, not dramatically, not at the level of an obvious overdose, but slightly, precisely above the therapeutic range that his cardiologist's records indicated had been his documented stable range across 18 months of treatment. The toxicologist flagged it because slightly wrong, in her experience, is worth noting. The pathologist noted it. The case was referred to the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office on October 18th, 4 days after Richard's death, as a death requiring further investigation before final cause determination. Detective James and Gwynn received a referral at 2:14 p.m. on October 18th. Nguyen's first call was to Richard Callahan's cardiologist. He asked a single question. Given Richard's documented therapeutic digoxin range, what would produce the post-mortem level the toxicologist had flagged? The cardiologist said, either a dose adjustment, which I did not make and his pharmacy records would confirm, or supplemental intake from an external source. External source. Not a prescription adjustment, not a pharmaceutical error. Something added to what Richard was already receiving. Nguyen's second call was to the pharmacy. Richard's prescription had not been adjusted in 14 months. His documented dose was consistent with his 18-month stable range. The elevated level had not come from a prescription. Gwynn drove to the Palm Beach County estate on the morning of October 19th. Diana Callahan opened the door. She said, "I've been expecting someone." Before we get into what Detective Gwynn found inside the house and what Diana Callahan's own devices had been recording for 6 months, if this case is landing for you, subscribe and turn on notifications. What comes next is the evidence that turned a cardiac death into a homicide case. Stay with me. Diana Callahan agreed to a voluntary interview on October 19th. She was composed throughout. She described the morning of October 14th in precise, consistent detail. She expressed appropriate grief. She asked, at one point, how much longer the investigation would take before the estate could be settled. Gwynn noted that question. He noted its specific timing. 45 minutes into a conversation about her husband's death, and he noted that she had asked it before anyone had used the word investigation in her presence. He did not challenge her. He thanked her for her time. He left, and then he obtained a warrant. The search of the Callahan estate on October 21st produced 3 significant findings. First, in Diana Callahan's walk-in closet, behind a row of shoeboxes on the upper shelf, a small amber glass bottle containing a liquid solution. The bottle had no label. The contents were sent to the state laboratory. Results: digoxin solution, concentration significantly higher than any commercially available formulation of the drug. She had not purchased this at a pharmacy. She had not obtained it through a prescription. The investigation would establish through financial records that she had purchased the raw chemical precursors, available through laboratory supply companies with appropriate account credentials, using a business account she had registered under a shell company name in January 2023, 6 months before Richard's death. Second, Diana's phone and laptop, seized under the warrant. The browser history, extracted by the Digital Forensics Unit, covered the period from January 2023 through October 2023. The relevant searches, in chronological order: digoxin therapeutic range cardiac patients, January 8th. Digoxin toxicity symptoms versus cardiac arrest, January 14th. How much digoxin to cause cardiac arrest, January 22nd. Digoxin postmortem detection time, February 3rd. Digoxin detection standard autopsy panel, February 11th. Life insurance cardiac death contestability, February 19th. How to dissolve digoxin in liquid, March 4th. She had researched the method. She had researched the detection window. She had researched the insurance implications. She had researched the dissolution method, in chronological order, over a period of 6 weeks, on her personal devices, and she had not cleared the history. Third, Richard Callahan's morning routine, as described by Diana in her voluntary interview. He drank a glass of orange juice every morning, prepared for him each day by Diana, before taking his medications. Orange juice, a liquid that would mask the slight bitterness of a dissolved compound. A daily routine that gave Diana Callahan access to her husband's intake every morning for 6 months. The financial investigation, running parallel to the forensic work, produced a specific trigger that had moved Diana from a distant marriage to a 6-month poisoning campaign. In December 2022, 1 month before the first browser search, Richard Callahan had met with his estate attorney. He had not told Diana about the meeting. The subject of the meeting: updating his will to reduce Diana's inheritance share and increase the trust allocation for his children from his first marriage, following a family discussion with Patrick and Melissa over Thanksgiving. The updated will had been drafted. It had not yet been signed. Richard had told his attorney he wanted to think about it through the holidays. He died in October 2023 with the original will in place. The unsigned draft, which would have reduced Diana's inheritance by approximately $14 million, was in his attorney's files. Diana had not known about the meeting or about the draft, or so she claimed. Her search history from December 28, 2022, 10 days after the attorney meeting, she claimed not to know about. Can espouse contest will change in Florida. She had known. Diana Callahan was arrested on November 3rd, 2023, 15 days after Detective Nguyen received the medical examiner's referral. Nguyen and 3 Palm Beach County Sheriff's deputies approached the estate. Diana Callahan answers the door in a silk robe. She looks at Nguyen. She does not look surprised. He says, "Mrs. Callahan, I have a warrant for your arrest for the first-degree murder of Richard Callahan." She says, "I'd like to call my attorney before we do anything else." He says, "You'll be able to do that from the station." She says, "Am I allowed to change clothes?" He says, "Yes." She goes upstairs. She returns 4 minutes later in a blazer and slacks. Her hair is done. She has applied lipstick. She extends her hands to the cuffs without being asked. She says before Nguyen speaks again, "I assume you found a bottle." She assumed they had found the bottle. Not, "I don't know what you're talking about." Not, "This is a mistake." She assumed they had found the bottle, the specific piece of physical evidence that she had apparently decided at some point to keep rather than discard. Nguyen said, "Yes, we found the bottle." She nodded. She got into the custody vehicle. She did not speak again until her attorney was present. Diana Callahan was charged with first-degree premeditated murder. In Florida, first-degree premeditated murder carries a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment or the death penalty, with the prosecution required to declare its sentencing intent before trial. The prosecution did not seek the death penalty. They sought life. Diana entered a not guilty plea. Her defense argued that the elevated digoxin level was a result of Richard's documented cardiac deterioration, that his body had been processing the drug less efficiently in his final months, producing a natural accumulation that mimicked external supplementation. They brought an expert witness, a pharmacologist, who testified to this possibility. The prosecution brought the bottle, the browser history, the shell company purchase records. The ensign will draft and the December 28th search. And Richard's cardiologist, who testified that his patient's kidney function, the primary mechanism for digoxin clearance, had been stable in his most recent blood work 6 weeks before his death. There was no documented physiological basis for the accumulation the defense described. The prosecution also brought Patrick and Melissa Callahan. Richard's children testified about their Thanksgiving conversation with their father, the conversation that had preceded the estate attorney meeting. Patrick testified that Richard had told him he was planning to adjust the will to better reflect his relationship with his children. Melissa testified that Diana had not been present for that conversation, that Richard had specifically chosen a moment when Diana was out of the room. He had known, on some level, that the conversation needed to happen when she wasn't listening. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. Diana Callahan was sentenced to life in the Florida Department of Corrections without the possibility of parole on February 28, 2024, by Palm Beach County Circuit Court Judge Sandra Moss. This court sentences Diana Callahan for a crime of sustained, researched, deliberate premeditation. She identified a method. She researched its detection profile. She sourced the substance. She administered it daily, in a glass of orange juice, to a man who trusted her enough to drink it. She did this for 6 months. The sentence this court imposes reflects not only the act, but the 6 months of calculation that preceded it and the specific cruelty of using a man's existing medical condition as the architecture of his death. Judge Sandra Moss. Sentencing remarks. February 28, 2024. The $10 million life insurance policy was voided. Florida's Slayer statute, which bars a person convicted of murder from inheriting from a victim, eliminated Diana's inheritance from the estate. The $37 million she had researched, planned, and killed for went to Richard's children, his charitable bequest, and the estate's legal costs. She received nothing. 3 things. All of them matter. First, the toxicologist's flag. The elevated digoxin level was small. It was at the margin of clinical significance. A different toxicologist, on a different day, might have noted it and moved on. This case was solved because one person in a laboratory decided that slightly wrong was worth flagging. In any investigation involving a person with a documented medical history dying of an apparently medically consistent cause, that specific habit, treating marginal findings as meaningful until proven otherwise, is the difference between a solved case and an inherited estate. Second, the browser history. Diana Callahan conducted 9 months of research on her personal devices and did not clear the history. This is now the 3rd case in this series, after EP26 and EP30, in which a perpetrator's own browser history produced the most explicit evidence of premeditation available to the prosecution. The search history does not lie. It does not forget, and it does not require the perpetrator's cooperation to be recovered. Third, the unsigned will. Richard Callahan was in the process of protecting his children from a marriage he had apparently recognized, on some level, as less than it should have been. He did not finish the process in time. The specific lesson, not a comfortable one, is that estate planning, like every other legal protection, only works when it is completed. The draft and the attorney's file produced crucial trial evidence. The signed document would have changed Diana's motive calculation entirely. That is the complete Diana Callahan case. A glass of orange juice every morning. 6 months. A toxicologist who decided slightly wrong was worth a phone call. A detective who drove to an estate and heard, "I've been expecting someone." A browser history that documented every stage of a plan from research to acquisition to execution. And a woman who came downstairs in a blazer and lipstick to be arrested because she had understood at some point before that morning that the bottle was eventually going to be found. She received nothing. Not the $10 million policy. Not the inheritance. Not the estate. Nothing. Richard Callahan's children received everything their father had intended to give them before he ran out of time to sign the document. If this case gave you something, the toxicology lesson, the browser history pattern, the estate planning detail, or just the understanding of how a medically disguised homicide is constructed and detected, subscribe and turn on notifications. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. The Patreon link is in the description. Drop a comment. Tell me what landed hardest: the orange juice, the 9 browser searches in order, the bottle she kept, the lipstick at 8 a.m. I read everyone. Take care of yourselves. I will see you in the next one.